Well, the meeting is live now. You may start.
Okay, so now, yeah, Rabba, you can continue. Yeah, you can start.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. I'm Radha Chaudhary, the head of marketing at the Finance and Investment Cell of Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, University of Delhi. And I, along with Deep, the research head, will be your host for the session. We're ecstatic to inform you that Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College has been nationally ranked the 10th best college in the country by India Today Rankings 2022 under the stewardship of a dynamic and visionary principal, Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha. ARSD College has been pertinent in providing its students with a platform to hone not only their academic skills, but also life skills. Deep, over to you.
Curtain rises and a new odyssey begins. This society guarantees chaos to order, curiosity to knowledge, and interest to the experience. FIC provides a wealth of possibilities to develop talents that last a lifetime. It necessitates a team of blazing brainstormers united by their passion for finance and eagerness to learn. I'm grateful to our college faculty for giving us this great chance. We at FIC strongly believe that every student must know about the basics of finance as we lead ourselves in modern economies. This dynamic student body is very well fulfilling its duty as a knowledge imparting society, encouraging budding investors and economists. The title of today's topic is Macroeconomic Impact of COVID-19. Now I would like to invite Mr. Rakesh Kumar, Assistant Professor of Department of Economics, to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Deep and Rabba. Good morning, everyone. Respected invited speaker of the day, Dr. Surjit Das of Jawaharlal Nehru University, Principal of the college, Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, Internal Quality Assurance Cell Coordinator, Dr. Vinita Tuli, TIC Department of Economics, ARSD College, Ranjan Swarnkar, colleagues and all other participants. I, Rakesh Kumar from the Department of Economics, Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, welcome you all in today's session. As we know, Finance and Investment Cell of Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, under the patronage of Internal Quality Assurance Cell of the college, is organizing this time a series of lectures on the state of Indian economy with leading economic experts who will explore and evaluate economic ramifications of COVID-19 pandemic. We are honored that experts in the field, Dr. Dipankar Singh Gupta, Dr. Surajit Das, Dr. B.N. Gopalakrishnan, and Dr. Anjali Tandon have agreed to grace us during the four-day journey and enlighten us on ramification of COVID-19 pandemic on different sectors like education, trade and investment, and of course on overall macroeconomy. The first lecture of this series was delivered on 2nd July by Dr. Dipankar Singh Gupta uh, on the topic Education for the Knowledge Economy in the Post-COVID World. Now, today on the second day of the session, we have amongst us Dr. Surajit Das, Assistant Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, who will be sharing his thoughts and insights on the topic macroeconomic impact of COVID-19. We welcome you, sir, and thank you for accepting our invitation. We also have amongst us our dynamic, far-sighted principal, Sir Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, under whose guidance, vision, and dedication, the college is proud to have achieved several landmarks over past few years. Sir has always inspired us to organize such events, which in addition to the teaching learning process are important for the comprehensive development of our students. Welcome you, sir. Now I invite Principal Sir Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha to speak a few words. Sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. Today's speaker, Honorable Dr. Surjit Das, Assistant Professor, JNU, IQC Coordinator, Dr. Vinita Tuli, Dr. Mr. Ranjan Swankar, FIC Convener, Dr. Apra, members Apala and Uttam, Dr. Rakesh, other colleagues, and my dear students. On behalf of Atmaram Sanatan Dharma College, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome Dr. Surjit Das in this webinar. And I am really very thankful to him for accepting our invitation to deliver a talk on microeconomic impact on COVID-19 and the way forward. In fact, this pandemic has affected the interdependent global economy severely. The Indian economy is no exception. So the pandemic had a deep impact on Indian domestic and international business, employment, and unprecedented collapse in economic activities. I hope that this lecture will be very fruitful for all of us. I look forward to the talk. I have always encouraged such conferences and seminars in the college campus because I believe that students and teachers are being benefited by these kind of activities. I am thankful and I congratulate organizing this kind of series of talk under the aegis of IQAC on the Centenary Celebration of Delhi University. So I am sure this lecture is going to be fruitful and beneficial for all the students and teachers. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for these inspiring words and gracing us with your presence, sir. As I told you, this is the second lecture of the four-lecture series, and today's lecture topic is macroeconomic impact of COVID-19. The economic significance of COVID-19 pandemic cannot be overstated. The context of highly globalized and integrated economies alone makes a modern day pandemic more likely and potentially more destructive to begin with. The unusual character of this crisis, a mixture of uh, epidemiology and economics, makes the problem a challenging one intellectually. Uh, Provisional estimates suggest a median output loss of approximately 6.5% in 2020, a gap that is expected to narrow to around 4% of the pre-pandemic trend by the end of 2021. While the COVID-19 pandemic is truly a global crisis, the economic impact has also been highly differentiated across countries. This heterogeneity partly reflects varying effectiveness in dealing with the pandemic. It is also related to the strengths of policy responses and the weights societies attach to health and economic objectives. Uh, for one, the large and uneven impact on the economy is providing a strong impetus for resource allocation. Some of the industries reliant on face-to-face interactions are hardest is hit, whereas other winning sectors, uh, su- uh, such as you can say uh, those which helps in conducting virtual meetings and working from home, they basically benefit, they could benefit from the permanent preference shifts. This pandemic has also affected smaller firms and low-income groups, which could have a long-term ramification on employment prospects and income distribution. While we must agree on the high cost of COVID-19 pandemic, the precise mechanism generating economic losses remain a subject of debate. The emerging economies like ours have been more constrained fiscally and have themselves seen public debt rising uh, historically high at over 60%. High public debt levels coupled with low growth could present challenges for central banks when time comes to rebuild policy space. Today we have Dr. Surjit Das, an expert in the field amongst us, who will be sharing his insights on macroeconomic impact of COVID-19. Dr. Surjit Das is an assistant professor of economics at Center for Economic Studies and Planning, the School of Social Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He completed his PhD in economics from JNU, Delhi. Before joining CESP at JNU, Delhi, Sir was teaching at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Sir has worked at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Delhi, as an economist. Sir has also worked with Kerala Planning Board and a Planning Commission of India as a consultant. His area of interest include macroeconomics, econometrics, public finance, and macroeconomic policy. Sir regularly writes in newspapers and magazines. Thank you, sir, for coming over here. Now I invite sir to deliver the lecture. Sir, please.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Rakesh sir, for this generous introduction. I must thank Professor Jha, the principal, for his kind words. And at the outset, I must thank ARSD College in general, particularly Opera, for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with the students. As I understand, most of the students are from either economics background or from commerce background. Opera, how much time do I have? It's 11:20 in my watch.
So I think by 12:20, 12:15.
Yeah.
Right, and have 15 to 20 minutes for question answer session.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. So when we talk about macroeconomic impact of COVID-19, and I have added this one in the title and the way forward, because I mean, I believe that the worst phase is over, and we have to come back to our business as usual situation as soon as possible. Otherwise the presentation would have been very depressing because the situation was depressing indeed. I mean, in the first set of lecture, I would first part of lecture, I would describe. I mean, we conducted some studies based on that, our results and so on, and our understanding about the overall situation, how bad the situation was, and the other developments, macroeconomic developments during particularly 2020-21, and also to some extent the first half of 2021-22 financial year. And in the later part of the presentation, I would try to focus through a brief discussion of our public finance in India, that what can be done, or what is the way forward. Okay. So one more thing, I think since student participants are here, if anything is not clear or if they want to ask any question, they are welcome, even in between.
Yeah, definitely.
So let me know.
I'll take care of it. Yeah.
Since most of them are economic students, so
yeah, economics and commerce. Yeah.
And commerce, so I have made the presentation as lucid as possible, but still if something is not clear, they should feel free to ask questions.
Definitely.
Clarificatory questions.
Right.
Thanks. So okay, good morning friends. Let us begin some of my thoughts and some of my observations about the macroeconomic impact of COVID-19 lockdown in India. How to change this slide? Yeah. Okay. So this particular table is taken from the press release which has been released by MOSPI, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Government of India, on 31st May 2022. This is provisional estimate of gross value added at basic prices by economic activity. I mean by main 8 sectors: agriculture, mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, construction, trade, hotel, transport, etc. financial, real estate and professional services, and the public administration, defense, and other services. So we have the data of 2019-20, that is pre-pandemic. The lockdown was imposed in March 2020. So end of March 2020. So the financial year 2019-20 was mostly unaffected by the lockdown. And then the first revised estimate we have got of 2020-21, and the provisional estimate for the year 2021-22 has been made available now. It takes some time after collecting the data, after processing it from all the states, etc. They compile it in this Central Statistical Organization, CSO, here at Sardar Patel Bhavan in Delhi. And then we get they adjust for export import, and then we get the estimates for GDP. And as you know, initially the government comes out with provisional estimate, and then they revise the estimates as and when more information arrives. And then the second revised estimate, and finally the actuals come. So now, as on 31st May 2022, we have the actuals of 2018-19, the second revised estimate of 2019-20, the first revised estimate of GDP of 2020-21, and the provisional estimate of 2021-22 financial year. So if we look at the growth rates, that is the last two columns, percentage change over the previous year, we can see in 2020-21, apart from agriculture and financial services, real estate and professional services, all other sectors, all other 6 sectors have faced, as far as gross value added is concerned, at basic prices at 2011-12 constant prices. You all know, economic students, that constant price is required, otherwise these numbers are not comparable year to year because there would be inflation. So if we net out the inflation and if we take the data at 2011-12 constant prices, we see that in real terms, all the sectors apart from agriculture and financial and real estate professional services, all other major sectors have faced a negative growth rate. Okay. However, in 2021-22, as compared to 2020-21, there is a sign of recovery, and all the sectors have experienced in real terms positive growth rates. Overall, for the entire economy, in 2020-21, that is the last row, the figures say that we have faced minus 4.8% growth, or around minus 5% growth in 2020-21 because of the lockdown, and 2021-22, it seems there is a 8% or more than 8% positive growth rate, which is a sign of recovery. However, since in 2020-21, we have experienced a negative growth rate, which is a huge shock. Indian economy in recent past has never faced negative growth rate. After that negative growth rate, since the base of GDP was low, when we calculated the growth rate of 2020-21-22 over 2021, naturally, the GDP growth rate seems to be impressive. However, that is mainly because of low base effect. As many people have written in the media, that this 2021-22 high growth rate has happened mainly because of the negative growth rate in the previous year. Okay. Now, if we look at some other table, which is also come out in the same press release of 31st May 2022, at 2011-12 prices, if we look at GVA at basic prices, the first row, I was saying that there have been minus 4.8% growth in 2021 and plus 8.1% growth in 21-22. That is the last financial year. Now, we know that gross domestic product is 1 plus 2, that is GVA at basic prices plus net taxes on products. Okay, so GDP, that is the third row, tells us that in 2021 the growth rate was minus 6.6%, as Rakesh sir was pointing out a couple of minutes back. And in 2021-22, the growth rate revived to 8.7% of GDP and NDP and so on. We know that in national income accounting chapter, we read that the GDP or the national income, if we express that by y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, right? That is consumption plus at aggregate level, consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. So these are the different components of GDP, expenditure components, which are like private final consumption expenditure, PFCE, government final consumption expenditure, GFCE, gross fixed capital formation, which is the investment, change in stocks plus valuable. I mean, these GFCF plus CIS plus valuables, they together constitute the investment. And then row 10 is exports, row 11 is imports. So we add net export, or C plus I plus G plus X minus M, and then there could be some statistical discrepancies, and then we arrive at the measure of GDP. So these are the different components of GDP. Now, what is interesting is from here, if we look at the per capita GDP, and if we look at the per capita, okay, I should have mentioned this, that as far as the composition, broad composition of GDP in India is concerned, our private final consumption expenditure constitutes the main component, constitutes almost 57% of total GDP. And our government expenditure, including the government expenditure of the central government, state governments, and also the local body governments, that is panchayats, municipalities, and corporations, the total government expenditure in this country is around 26% of GDP. So that makes it 57 plus 26 is 82% or so. And then there is investment, which is around little higher than 25%, between 25% and 30% of total GDP. So that way it crosses 100%. And then net export, export minus import, as that is a negative component. We have current account deficit in the balance of payment. So that way net export component is negative, minus 2 to 3% of GDP, which is the current account deficit of India. So that constitutes 100% of GDP. That is the broad picture, broad composition of GDP in Indian context. So here in per capita terms, well, population estimates come from the census, and census could not take place because of the lockdown and so on. So these are all estimates. According to these estimates, in 2019-20, the CSO says that our estimated population is 134 crores, which is likely to be 137 crores in 2021-22. According to this population estimate in per capita terms, the growth rate of GDP in 2020-21 has been minus 7.6%, okay, in per capita terms, because population is also growing. Inflation has been netted out because this is taken at constant 2011-12 prices. And 2021-22, the growth rate has been exactly positive 7.6%, neutralizing the initially negative impact of a lockdown on GDP. However, as far as per capita private final consumption expenditure is concerned, that faced minus 7% growth in 2021 because of lockdown, which is yet to recover in 2021-22. It is still less than that in absolute numbers, and per capita NNI and per capita GNI, gross national income and net national income after netting out the depreciations, these faced -8% and -9.7% growth respectively in 2021, and in 21-22 the positive growth rates have been actually in absolute terms lower than the negative growth rate of 2021. Therefore, they are yet to recover the negative impact from the negative impact of lockdown in the financial year 2021-22. This is the last slide about growth. I don't want to go into the detail of growth, but state-wise, if we look at the gross state domestic products of different states, this is available from Directorate of Economics and Statistics of different respective state governments, and which is compiled by, again, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Government of India. So if we look at the growth rate of GSDP at constant, again, 2011-12 prices to net out the impact of inflation, we see that in 2020, most of the states have faced negative growth rates, but 21-22 data are not available for many states yet. However, whatever data is available, there is a sign of recovery and positive growth rates in 21-22. So this is the impact of lockdown in brief on the aggregate national income or gross domestic product in the context of Indian economy. As sir was saying, that many countries have faced this negative shock in their GDP growth rates in different degrees. However, in India, it was quite severe because we were growing, our growth rate was coming down even before lockdown, but we were growing at around 5% on an average annual growth rate in real terms. From there, we have faced -6.6% growth rate, or in per capita terms, -7.5% growth rate in the year 2020-21 because of the lockdown. All right. Now, let me briefly talk about one survey that we conducted with Kanika Goel. Kanika Goel is also teaching in Delhi University on ad hoc basis in the College of Vocational Studies, and she is a friend. So we conducted this study together. This is a small survey of 500 sample households we conducted using Google Forms, because in 2020, that time it was not possible to go for primary surveys. So we conducted this Google form based survey taking 500 households into consideration. So these 500 households were from in and around Delhi only, Delhi NCR, and obviously they were like middle class English speaking households, because otherwise they can't form they can't fill up forms in English in using Google form. So it has a urban upper middle class bias in the sample. Poor people obviously were not there, or non-English speaking people could not participate in the survey. So these people, their monthly average family income was around 2.5 lakh rupees on an average. Now, they are not obviously poor people. They are they earn. I mean, it's a family income, but still they earn around 2.5 lakh rupees. They used to earn before the lockdown 2.5 lakh rupees, 2,40,000 rupees on an average per month. So this is the set of sample that we surveyed, and there we asked them that in these 7 categories, whether they had any plan of purchasing automobile or furnitures or electronic items, consumer durables, or some property or flat or house, or they had some plan for traveling within India, or they had a plan in their family if some of their family members are unwell, or they needed to undergo some surgery, whether they had a plan for that or not. And whether there was a plan for some kind of family get together before the lockdown. And if yes, then because of lockdown, whether it had to be, these things had to be postponed, or this could take place in time, or postponed, they had to postpone the plan by 3 months or 6 months, or they had to postpone it by 1 year or more than 1 year, or they had to postpone the plans indefinitely. So this is that way we are trying to understand that what has been the fall in demand for these sectors on an average. Of course, our sample is not a representative sample for the whole country, but as far as upper middle class people of India is concerned, upper middle class in the sense we all call ourselves to be middle class, but the fact of the matter is less than 3% population in India pays direct tax. So they come under direct tax bracket. And even if there is only one earning member per family, and even if we include the agricultural rich, we'll see maximum 15 to 20% population come under this direct tax bracket, direct tax pay, come under, their families come under direct tax bracket. Others are earning less than 5 lakh rupees per annum, or let's say less than what, 40,000 rupees per month. Okay, so here, as far as this survey result is concerned, we published this paper, Impact of Lockdown on Demand, a survey report in Earthshod, the University of Rajasthan. They have a journal, very old journal, in the December issue of 2020. If you are interested, you can look, it is available in our website. So this, as far as those black portions are postponement indefinitely, and the white portions below, they actually I mean, they could go according to their plans for buying all these, I mean, consumer durables, or if they had a plan travel. In fact, out of 500 households, you can see that more than 400 households, they had a plan of traveling within India, but that was simply not possible because of the lockdown, or they were scared of infection and so on, so they had to postpone the plans. And I mean, all these sectors, as far as automobile is concerned or furniture is concerned, or these are numbers, these are in numbers, and the next graph tells you in percentage terms, same graph, in percentage terms, that let's say in automobile sector, for example, more than 30% people postponed their plan of buying either two-wheeler or four-wheeler forever. So that sector would get a bad hit, and many people had to postpone their plans either by 3 months or by 6 months or by more than a year. So in the financial year 2020-21, the automobile sector would face a huge, more than 50% less demand than usual. And similarly for furniture sector, similarly for electrical items, and this construction sector, property, flat, household, there was a downturn in demand. So more than 60% people had to postpone the plans at least by 6 months or more, 6 months or 1 year or more, and so on and so forth. Okay, so surgery, similarly, family get together, all these tent wallas and catering services and everything, their demand and their therefore their employment generation in those sectors are dependent on these demands. So if family get-togethers had to be postponed by this much, naturally that sector also got a bad hit, and the employment in those sectors would also get a bad hit. It is not difficult to understand that their wages would come down substantially, and there would be layoffs and so on. Okay. So then if we look at the unemployment and income loss, this work we have done, it is forthcoming, it is yet to be published. The paper has been accepted in the journal called Manpower Journal, brought out by NILRD under Niti Aayog. So this I have done with Preksha Mishra. So this is unemployment and income loss in the first 3 months of lockdown, when you may remember that there was a huge problem of migrant laborers and so on. But not only migrant laborers, migrant laborers are huge in number in India, but still, as compared to the total labor force, the size of total labor force is in India is around 51 crore. So it's a huge number. And the migrant laborers would still be a small proportion of this total labor force. So as far as the total labor force is concerned in India, from the periodic labor force survey data of National Statistical Office, we get these informations. So 2019 for the year 2019-20, they have released the unit level data, and which incorporates in the months of April, May, and June of 2020. So that is the first quarter of lockdown. So we tried to estimate what has been the unemployment rate during that period. The next data has come out recently. We are working on that. For that data would reveal that for the entire year 2020-21, what was the situation like of unemployment, overall unemployment in the country. So if we look at the unemployment rates or in rural, urban areas of male and female and overall, then we see that urban unemployment increased like anything. Rural areas, there was some MGNREGS, employment guarantee scheme, and agriculture, as you have noticed, grew by more than 3% per annum rate. So agricultural growth rate was not that badly affected because of lockdown. At the same time, there was this MGNREGS scheme. So in the rural sector, the unemployment rate went up as let's say pre-lockdown unemployment rate was less than 10%, 9% or so. According to CWS, that is current weekly status, we see that in the first quarter, April to June 2020, first quarter of lockdown, the urban unemployment, overall urban unemployment rate rose to 33%. Okay, and that for female went up to 38%, and for male it was 30.4%. So overall, it was 33% unemployment. And in rural areas, the unemployment rate was relatively less, 18.5%. But here also, female unemployment rate was higher than that of male. So overall in India, including rural and urban, male and female, the unemployment rate went up to 22.5% in the first quarter of lockdown, as far as this particular data set is concerned. And if we look at the percentage increase in unemployment rate, which is the cause of concern, we see that in urban areas, it went up by 204% in the first quarter of lockdown, as compared to pre-lockdown unemployment rate. Overall in India, including male, female, rural, urban, it went up by 157%, which is huge increase suddenly within 3 months' time, because I mean, we all have experienced during that time it was not possible. I must mention one more thing. That is, I was talking about the size of the entire labor force, which is around 51 crore in India. More than half of the labor force in India is self-employed. Self-employed means, I mean, by employment, we often mean that, there would be some employer, there would be some employees and so on. But self-employed means, small shopkeepers, small auto wallahs, taxi wallahs, those who have their own auto taxi, or mechanics, plumbers, electricians, and those who are self-employed, their profit is equal to their income. So all these people constitute 52% of total workforce in India. And less than 25% is salaried or wage employees, and more than 25 by 1/4 is casual employees, okay, casual laborers. So that is the composition of labor force in India. So during lockdown, all these self-employed people, they have lost their income. So for all practical purposes, they became unemployed. That's why, mainly because of that, there is one category called workers with zero income. So that increased like anything. That is why if you look at this PLFS report, their unemployment figures would not match with our unemployment figure, because they have treated the people who were workers or employed with zero income. They have treated them to be employed and not unemployed. But we have treated them as unemployed, because if your income is zero, then whether you are working, maybe somebody has opened the shop, but there was no customer, or there was no profit, there was no income. So that is equivalent to unemployment. So we have treated that employment with zero income as unemployed. And if you incorporate that, you will see that unemployment rate increased enormously during the first 3 months of lockdown in India. The chart depicts the same thing. That is, rural unemployment went up. Pre-lockdown rate was 7.9%, which went up to 18.5%. Urban unemployment rate was 10.8% before lockdown, which according to current weekly status from PLFS data, which went up to 33% after lockdown. And overall, 8.7% unemployment, pre-lockdown unemployment rate went up to 22.5%. If you include the people with zero income, people employed with zero income, if you include them as in the category of unemployed people. This is, it's not only about employment or unemployment. There has been huge fall in people's income also in the first 3 months of lockdown. So till now we have this, data up to only this, and now the unit level data we are working on. But there are other private sources like CMI data, etc. They have also shown these things in various ways. But since we are trying to work on the authentic government data only, that is why we are depending on this PLFS information. According to that, as I was saying, that people with zero income increased from 8.7% before lockdown to 20.6% in the first quarter after lockdown was imposed. And in urban areas, it went up to 30%, people with zero income. Okay, so it was earlier 10.8%, which was the unemployment rate, but it increased to 30%, as high as 30% in the first quarter of lockdown. Now, if we look at the proportion of labor force with less than 100 rupees income a day, so we can see that overall 26% people could earn either zero income or less than 100 rupees income per day during the first 3 quarters of lockdown. And in urban areas, it is 34%, almost 35% of people, they earned less than rupees 100 a day during the first 3 months of lockdown. As far as the NREGA wage rate is concerned, the average wage rate under the employment guarantee scheme was rupees 202 in the financial year 2020-21. So we have tried to see that what proportion of labor force earned less than even NREGA's wage rate during the first 3 months of lockdown. And we see that 42.6% people could earn less than 200, either zero or less than 100 or less than 200. So this is cumulative, less than 200 rupees a day income during the first 3 months of lockdown. And in urban areas, the situation was severe, although urban areas are more expensive areas than rural areas. But still, in urban areas, 43.6% people could earn less than rupees 200 a day during the first 3 months of lockdown. So that is from here, this demand for having some urban employment guarantee program, or having some or the demand for extending the rural employment guarantee scheme to the urban areas also came from. So many people were arguing that government should give some minimum wage. Rupees 200 a day is a bare minimum for a family to sustain, to survive. So at least, at, let's say, some minimum state-wise minimum wage norms vary state to state. So according to the minimum wage norms of different states, for survival, for basic minimum survival, government should provide some employment guarantee to the urban areas also, as it is already there in existence in the rural areas. Because the urban areas, where, by the way, by urban areas, we have to understand it is not only big cities like Delhi or Calcutta or Bombay, Hyderabad, Bangalore. Urban areas, in 40% population in India live in urban areas, and by urban areas we mean the kasbas, the suburban areas, even the rural areas with very high population density are incorporated into urban areas. So there is no employment guarantee scheme. However, unemployment rate and the income opportunity of people shrunk like anything during lockdown, due to lockdown in India. So there was a demand for cash transfer also. Some cash transfer have happened also through Jan Dhan accounts of people. We will discuss in a moment. But yeah, so that demand was there. Is there any question? Is this clear? Afra, am I making myself clear?
Yeah, I think there is no question in the chat box. Let me see. In case if there is any question, I'll just ask you.
Yes, please stop me. I'll.
Yeah,
if there is clarificatory question, if it is substantive question, I can answer.
Yeah.
After the presentation.
Okay.
But am I making myself clear?
Yeah. Very simple. Yeah.
Is this all right? Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Okay, great. Okay, now we conducted another survey. These were mainly telephonic survey in 13 states, including these states, your Bihar, Odisha, Delhi, Gujarat, Haryana, Kerala, Ladakh, West Bengal, not southern part of West Bengal or northern part of West Bengal, Sikkim, Telangana, Tripura, Uttarakhand, and in Uttar Pradesh. So there, over telephone, we had a questionnaire, and over telephone with the help of my friends, because I cannot speak so many languages. So with the help of, we didn't have any funding or anything. Just with the help of my friends, we started conducting telephonic surveys during the entire period 2020-21. From we began from the surveys from, I think, June 2020, and the last survey was in Assam in 21 January. So 2020 June to 2021 January, this entire period, we surveyed total in 15 states. 13 states we conducted this telephonic survey, and in 2 states we could go in person for conducting primary surveys. One is Goa, that I went in along with my friends in October 2020, and in Assam January 2021. So in total 15 states, we using that questionnaire, we surveyed the people to understand, common people, mainly people from I mean, there were some government officers or school teachers, college teachers, etc. in the sample, but most of the sample respondents were either were engaged in informal sectors of the economy, in various sectors, unorganized informal sectors in the economy, or they were self-employed, like that. So that way, our total sample size of 15 states was 3,142 households, comprising of total 14,472 people. Okay, so that was quite a big survey, but we conducted one by one. So state to state, they may not be necessarily comparable, because the data was collected in different time periods according to our convenience and when we could actually collect. And also there's a lacuna in this survey, that is the sample households were not necessarily, the sampling technique was not very scientific, so to say, because that time, we didn't have that luxury to, design the sample properly and choose from there. Whatever phone numbers we could gather from different sources, we tried to conduct surveys, and people were suffering badly. So to conduct those surveys, it was very painful experience, and also many people were not in a position to respond to our questionnaire and so on, and they were asking whether we can help them in some way or other. We said that we can't. So under distress, they were not mentally in a condition to respond to our questionnaire always. So whatever, but still we could talk to 3,142 people from more than 3,000 households, comprising of around 15,000 people during 2020-21, which reveals that 47% of families during the survey reported absolute zero income during the lockdown. So out of 3,142 households, almost 50% families in our sample reported absolutely zero income during the lockdown. The average income of those households came down by 54% due to the lockdown, and 50% respondents reported increase in their indebtedness due to the lockdown. Indebtedness, direct or indirect indebtedness. Some of the people, they borrowed money directly borrowed money either from their friends or relatively well-off relatives and so on and so forth. And some of them, they could not pay rent. They were staying in rented accommodation, or they have taken stuff from the grocery stores but could not pay the bill and so on. So they were indirectly indebted, but 50% respondents reported increase in their level of indebtedness due to the lockdown. The others could somehow manage with their past savings. Of course, for government employees and some others who were engaged in organized private sector, their income loss was not that severe. Some have faced 30% pay cut or 25% pay cuts, and government employees didn't face any pay cuts, so they were safe. But on an average, 50% respondents, their indebtedness increased during lockdown 2021, and rest of them could manage with their past savings. So that is coming out quite clearly from the survey result. And some of these highlights, as high as 46% of the respondents for which we had the information, suspected their expected income would be around 40% of their pre-lockdown income on an average. So we were asking that, what is your expectation that in next 6 months, would you be able to come back? Whatever business, little business or work they were doing. So on an average, they were expecting that their income would become 40% in next 6 months, 40% of what their income was in before lockdown. So then they 68%, almost 70% respondents wanted employment, Urban Employment Guarantee Act. As I was saying, there was a high demand, and our sample had an urban bias. So those who are from rural areas, anyway, they're out of, they don't need urban employment guarantee anymore. So anyway, 2/3 of our sample households, they said that there is an urgent need of having some kind of employment of last resort program for the urban areas also. 72%, we were, in Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package, initially in the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan package, it was announced, and then it was made part of this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package of central government, which promised to distribute free ration during the lockdown, and free gas cylinders of cooking gas, and also some money in Jan Dhan account, rupees 500 per account per month, something like that. So in Jan Dhan accounts, so we were asking people that whether they have got those things or not. The results vary widely state to state. Some states, in Kerala, for example, 90%, more than 90% people have said that they have got ration. But in some states, it was, for example, in Sikkim, it was very less, and so on and so forth. So on an average, taking all 15 states together, 72% respondents have said that they have got some ration, maybe lower than the entitlement, but they have got some free ration during the lockdown months. 27% of sample families who needed it did not get free ration, but 72% is not bad, because 20% people can manage on their own, the richer section of population. So more or less reach of ration was relatively good. Of course, in some states it was relatively poor than the other states, where overall the distribution of free ration was good. And I think given the composition of labor force and the kind of wages that they could earn, income they could earn during lockdown months, widespread famine could be avoided in India, mainly because of this ration distribution. And also NREGS has played a big role, at least in rural areas, in absorbing the unemployed, the increased unemployed youth, and also the reverse migrant labor force. So however, so 74% of sample families, they have either did not have Jan Dhan account, because many states there is no Jan Dhan account, they are not even aware of Jan Dhan account, and so on. Like in Kerala, many people have told us that we are not aware of this Jan Dhan, what is this, etc. But in some states like Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh and so on, some people have got some money in Jan Dhan account. So overall, 74% did not have Jan Dhan account, or they have not received any money in their account. Only 789 respondents, or 25%, have received some money in Jan Dhan account. May not be 500 in every month regularly, but at least some money they have received in their Jan Dhan account. And less than 23% families have reported to receive free gas cylinders during the lockdown, and 77% respondents of our sample. I am not saying again that it may not be representative for the entire country, but 77% of them, those families, have not received any free gas cylinders during the lockdown. So that was the implementation of the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, or the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package, part of that, of course. Now, I am not incorporating the discussion because of paucity of time. A lot of things have to be covered. So the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package in details, but we all know that it was mainly, the actual expenditure enhancement was less than 1%. It was more than 10% of GDP amount of worth of package, but less than 1% was actual expenditure enhancement of the government. And most of it was kind of financial. Now, there was a double counting also. Many people have, I also wrote, many people have written that in the one hand, RBI took some steps for potential liquidity enhancement by reducing, let's say, reserve ratios, your SLR and so on, and by infusing some liquidity, potential liquidity again, in the banking and financial system. Since this finance and investment cell of ARSD College, I think this discussion will be particularly interesting for you guys, that credit cannot be delivered until and unless it is demanded. Okay, so now potential infusion of liquidity does not mean the actual credit delivery would automatically increase. Credit is not actually supply constraint in our country, it is actually demand constraint. Well, that I mean, after getting satisfied for credit rating, if the banks are not satisfied with the credit rating, they would not give credit. If poor people go and ask for credit, even if we people go and ask for business loans, we would not get, we may not get. We may get housing loans, because house would be, or for buying real estate properties, that would be mortgaged. But it is very difficult to get business loans from private commercial banks or government commercial banks in this country, because they are often not satisfied with the credit rating of the borrower. And if they are not, then they will either charge exorbitant interest rate, or they will not give loans. So that is one part of it. Their government gave some guarantee that you don't have to show any collateral. Government will give some guarantee, and under government guarantee at relatively lower rate of interest, particularly small and medium scale enterprises and also the agricultural farmers, they can avail loan at cheaper, relatively cheaper rate, and at relatively easier terms. However, what has happened at aggregate level, many people availed those easy loans, but they replaced their old loans, past dates, with these easy loans. And overall at aggregate level, your investment as proportion of GDP, or investment, credit to GDP ratio, credit to deposit ratio, etc., did not increase. Now that has happened because naturally, because it was not a good time to invest. I mean, market was down, and investors would make investment only in expectation of profit. If the expected profit rate, however lower the interest rate might be, if the expected profit rate is even lower than that, then investors would not invest. However, push you do from the government side, so it doesn't matter. Investors would make investment only when there is profitable opportunity, and profitable opportunity depends on the demand for their products and services that they produce, and that in turn depends on the purchasing power of people, and purchasing power of people is dependent in turn on the employment at aggregate level, on the employment and wages that they earn. So that got a bad hit due to lockdown, and because of that, purchasing power of people came down drastically at aggregate level. As a result, moreover, there was uncertainty in next 6 months also. They didn't know how much they would earn. So because of these uncertainties, they postponed their consumption decisions, as I was arguing in that survey also. And as a result of that, I mean, demand for many commodities and services came down. So profitable opportunities in those sectors shrunk, and investors were not particularly interested in increasing their investment. What is investment? Investment is addition to the stock of capital. So with their existing stock of capital, they were not producing at full capacity level of output because of lack of demand. Now, on top of that, why would they increase the stock of capital or make new investment in order to, and when there is no demand in the market because of lack of purchasing power of people? So this data is the credit deposit ratio of all the commercial banks operating in India taken together, and investment to credit ratio. Investment means investment in government securities and other approved securities, which is basically the default option for the banks. If banks cannot deliver credit to the market, then the rest of the money they don't want to keep it idle. So the other option is to park it back with the Reserve Bank of India at reverse repo rate, which is very low, lower than the repo rate. So there is this option of investment in government securities and other approved securities, where they can earn at least 7 to 8% return per annum. So if they don't deliver credit, obviously they would from their deposit, after keeping aside the reserve ratios, if they can't deliver credit, then, or if there is a lack of demand in the credit market, after getting satisfied, of course, for the credit rating, because they can't accumulate NPAs forever. So they invest in government securities and other approved securities, and as a result of which, this investment to credit ratio, or investment in government securities to credit which they are delivering to the market, that ratio, which is the black line you can see on the top panel. I mean, earlier before 22nd May, it was lower. It was lower. Now it started increasing, particularly from 27th March, when the lockdown was imposed in 2020. The last week of March, lockdown was imposed, and since then you see that the investment to credit ratio continuously increased from, this is in the secondary axis, from less than 36% of total deposit to total credit to more than 43%. It increased up to 11th September, no, 25th September, okay, 2020. And then it remained more or less there. It came down a little bit up to 9th April, no, 26th March 2021. Then there was a second wave of corona COVID. As a result of that, again, it increased to 43% or so. And as a result of that, so they were playing safe. Banks were playing safe because they could not deliver credit, and not only playing safe, but also there was lack of demand for credit. Because if we look at this credit deposit ratio, which is the other this truncated line, this dashed line, that was more than 76% till before lockdown, till 27th March 2020, which came down consistently up to again 25th September 2020. That is the first two quarters of lockdown, okay, April, May, June, and July, August, September. So up to 25th September, it was coming down and came down below 72%, 71.5%, and then it remained there for some time. Again, during the second wave, it started falling after 9th April 2021, and up to, we have the data up to 18th June. I mean, this graph I drew because I was writing a chapter for a book which came out in 2021. So you can see that Atmanirbhar Bharat package was, Bharat Abhiyan package was announced in PM Garib Kalyan package came immediately after the lockdown was announced in April, and Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package came down also pretty soon in May, June, but the situation did not reverse. The fall in credit deposit ratio continued of Indian commercial banks, and their investment in government securities and other approved securities kept increasing, and it is continuing like that even after the announcement, even after so much encouragement by the government to SMEs and to the farmers for accessing loan, for taking loans from the commercial banks. And even after infusion of so much liquidity, potential liquidity, again, not actual, to the commercial banks and other financial institutions, the credit deposit ratio did not improve. It did not, as I was saying, because of the fact that the market was down and profitable opportunity was less, and investors were skeptical before making investment. So naturally, they may have taken these easy loans and replaced their old loans with these easy loans. But at aggregate level, the investment is not picking up yet. Okay. Another interesting thing is the foreign exchange reserve of the Reserve Bank of India, which increased continuously. Today morning, I was checking up to the end of 25th June 2022. The foreign exchange reserve of India is around $593 billion. Okay, almost $600 billion, which is around 47 lakh crore rupees, which is around, let's say, more than 20% of our GDP, 22-23% of our GDP amount of foreign exchange reserve we are sitting on, but we don't know what to do with it. Now that reserve has been accumulated in order to keep the exchange rate in check. However, that is our exchange rate policy, so that we don't lose in the international competitiveness in the world market. The RBI accumulates foreign exchange reserve, And if we look at BSE Sensex, when we were facing the negative growth rate, I have plotted this from 20th March 2020 to 2nd July of 2021. This entire period, we were facing huge unemployment problem, huge negative growth rate in all sectors, and so on and so forth. But the Sensex, BSE Sensex continuously increased, and it went up from less than 36,000, is it, to more than 50,000, and like that. So it continuously increased in the share market. One reason is investors were skeptical in investing in real economy, so they were parking their money back in the share market. That's why Sensex increased. Another reason is some foreign money, foreign investment came in Indian share market during that time, so that didn't get disturbed. As a result of that, in capital account of balance of payment, we had huge surplus, and government had to manage the exchange rate, and they accumulated this huge foreign exchange reserve. So if we look at the increase in foreign exchange reserve, that is also around 3% of GDP, more than 3% of GDP during the lockdown year of 2020-21. So this is another development. Now, if we look at from Indian public finance statistics, if we look at the combined government expenditure on education, health, interest payment, and capital expenditure of government as a proportion of GDP, by combined I mean combining central government and state governments, taking all the state governments taken together. So we see that our health expenditure, which is one of the lowest in the whole world, is around 1%, including water supply and sanitation. It is this is pre-lockdown, 1.3% of GDP, and it remained flat since 1990-91 till date. So the lowest line. Okay. So this is the health expenditure to GDP ratio in Indian context. In 2004, I think this previous UPA government, first UPA government promised that this health expenditure to GDP ratio would be increased from 1% to more than 3% of GDP. China actually could do this. Chinese health expenditure to GDP ratio was around 1% in 1999-2000, which they have increased to more than 3% now. But in this country, we remained at the same level of 1%. And if we include water supply and sanitation, it is around 1.3% or so. Health expenditure to GDP ratio remains like that. As far as education expenditure to GDP ratio of central state governments, everything together, it is around 3%, little less than 3% of GDP now. And it remained there, although they promised it would be enhanced to 6% of GDP. Most of the countries around the world spend more than 4.5% of GDP on education and more than 2% on health. We are spending one of the lowest, but including health and education in this country, the total government expenditure is less than 5% of GDP. As far as capital expenditure of government is concerned, that is also including of central and state governments, that continuous line, that is also less than 5%. It fluctuates in between 4 and 5% of GDP. And as far as interest payment is concerned, on the past date of government, that is more than both capital expenditure as well as social sector expenditure, including education and health in this country. So the dashed line, the top dashed line, okay, and that is the case for last 30 years, okay, 30 years or so. So this is one extremely disturbing fact, which is very exceptional about Indian economy. As I was saying, government health expenditure to GDP ratio, if you take World Bank data from World Development Indicator 2020-21, see the most of the country groups are spending much higher on health as compared to India. India is the last but one, this white column at the end. In India and in this part of the world, in South Asia, we spend, our government spend the least on health expenditure as compared to most of the country groups around the world. developed countries are spending more than 6%, more than 7% of GDP on health, and most of the countries are spending around 3%, definitely above 2%, around 3% of GDP on health, and we are spending less than 1% on health alone, without including water supply and sanitation. As far as education is concerned, the same story, the same World Development Indicators 2021 World Bank data tells us that most of the country governments are spending much higher. We are spending, as I was saying, less than 3% of GDP on education, and most of the country groups around the world, they are spending much higher than us, at least 4.5% of GDP. Many countries are spending more than 4.5% of GDP on education, but our health and education expenditures of central and state governments are one of the lowest in the whole world. As far as fiscal deficit to GDP ratio of India is concerned, that is the highest. See, and after lockdown, it has increased everywhere, but it has increased in India too, including central and state governments. Probably now the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is around 12% of GDP, which is very high. But in most of the countries, under lockdown, the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio increased primarily because of expenditure enhancement for giving stimulus packages and so on. But in Indian case, it has happened primarily because of revenue shortfall, and expenditure actually has been reduced, including central and state governments under crisis, under huge demand shortage. Our expenditure GDP ratio actually fell down, but fiscal deficit increased primarily because of revenue shortfall, because of tax shortfall. So unlike the rest of the world, in developed countries, on an average, I was seeing their expenditure enhancement has been more than 8% of GDP. And even in middle income emerging market economies, the expenditure enhancement of government has been to tackle the crisis demand problem. They gave a stimulus of more than 3.5% of GDP. And in this country, the expenditure, for the combined expenditure of central and state government as a proportion of GDP has actually fallen or remained stagnant under negative GDP growth. So the denominator would be lower in case of negative growth, and expenditure GDP ratio therefore would look like little higher than actually what it is. Anyway, but what is interesting is the primary deficit to GDP ratio, the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is highest in India as compared to the most of the country groups around the world. This is advanced G20, this is G7 and middle income countries and so on and so forth. So, but if you look at the same country groups and take primary deficit to GDP ratio instead of your fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, you see that we are somewhere in the middle or lower middle side. We are not the highest. Therefore, our interest, what is the difference between primary deficit and fiscal deficit? It is the interest payment component on past debt of government. Okay, so that is very high in Indian context. In fact, I was looking at worldwide data again. This is from Fiscal Monitor of IMF. Interest payment component to GDP ratio in advanced world is very less than 1%. In fact, in most of the country groups, it is around 1% or less than 1% of GDP. And here it is more than around 5% of GDP, which is huge, which is higher than the combined expenditure on health and education of the central and state governments taken together. Okay, so this extra interest payment is happening because of two things. One, we have stopped monetization, and second, we are trying to give indirect support to the commercial banks. As I was saying, that commercial banks, if they can't deliver credit to the market because of lack of demand, what they do is they can invest in government securities and earn 7 to 8% return per annum. So that guarantee government is giving to the commercial banks in this country, that your 7% return is absolutely assured. Even if you can't do any business in the market, you can always invest in government security at 7 to 8% rate. And to give that guarantee, government is incurring this cost. which is more than 5% of GDP, which is higher than the combined education and health expenditure in this country. So the last point, this is my last slide. I would finish within 2-3 minutes. I was calculating roughly that if government has to provide universal employment guarantee in this country, okay, I mean, universal employment guarantee means, I mean, extending the MGNREGS program to the urban areas also at a very minimum wage rate, which is the state specific minimum wage rates, just for which is bare minimum for survival. At least that much, I think any civilized society should provide to its citizens. At least that employment, some kind of employment of guarantee for employment of last resort. Okay, if they don't get anything, they can, for survival, they can earn at least 200-300 rupees per day for 100 days in a year or something like that. So that way I was calculating. This is the calculation. I wrote a piece also somewhere in I think this Hyderabad based newspaper. I'm forgetting the name. So if you search in Google, you'll get it. So 100 days of employment, to provide 100 days of employment at enhanced wage rate, which is equal to the minimum wage norm of different states. If we have to provide employment guarantee, then total extra cost, including the 30% cost on equipments and other administrative cost, etc., the total cost of providing that would not exceed rupees 2.57 lakh crore. Okay, which is not the extra cost, which is the total cost. Total cost of providing universal employment guarantee in this country at minimum wage rates for 100 days in a year would be 2.57 lakh crore, which is less than 1% of GDP. The expected GDP is, I mean, what is mentioned in our budget, union budget document of this year is, I mean, 1% of that is 2.58 lakh crore. So with 1% of GDP amount of government expenditure, universal employment guarantee can be ensured, which would enhance the purchasing power of people. And also, if government spends more money on health and education, the out-of-pocket expenditure of poorer section of population, those who avail government schools, government hospitals, and so on and so forth, their out-of-pocket expenditure would be reduced. So to purchase other commodities and services, their purchasing power would be enhanced. We call this social wage. So if government spends little more money on education, on health, anyway, they spend one of the lowest in the whole world. And if they spend 1% money on employment guarantee, then purchasing power of poorer section of people would be enhanced substantially, which would help us in handling this humanitarian crisis which is going on today. And the extra expenditure would to provide urban employment guarantee or universal employment guarantee would be 0.5% of GDP, because government is already spending around 0.5% of GDP, and FCI has huge food stock. So we can also think of paying the wage half in terms of food and half in terms of money, if required, instead of wasting the huge food stock which is there with the FCI. So we can think in innovative manner. Now I want to end with this macroeconomic point, that if under this severe demand crisis, in a demand constraint situation, supply is not increasing because of lack of investment. Investment is not taking place because of the fact that the market is down, it is not profitable. Their profit expectation of the businessmen are relatively low, and that is low because of the lack of purchasing power of people. Therefore, you need to give some fiscal multiplier. Now, in this country, fiscal deficit to GDP ratio has increased. Many people argued that that would give a boost to the economy, etc. However, in my opinion, it would be more effective if the purchasing power of people is enhanced, and government, instead of giving tax concessions, if government actually spends on health, education, and employment guarantee, etc., which would directly enhance purchasing power particularly a poorer section of population. And since I'm quoting Mikhail Kaleski here, since poorer section of population, they spend more, their consumption expenditure is proportionately more out of their income as compared to the richer section. The saving is proportionately higher for the richer section of population. If you give 100 rupees extra to the poorer section of population, obviously the multiplier effect, since the consumption ratio, marginal propensity to consume is higher for them, the value of Keynesian multiplier would also be higher for them. And at the same time, so that would help in boosting the economy, in encouraging the investors by creating profitable opportunity in the market. So it would enhance growth, it would help us in faster recovery and so on. And at the same time, it would it would help us in overcoming the ongoing humanitarian crisis because of the lockdown, or as a consequence of this COVID-19 induced lockdown in the country. So I would argue for front loading the government expenditures, which is called for, if you have a plan of spending some money in next 5 years, you spend it as soon as possible in first 1 or 2 years, so that the economy gets a boost and we can go to the business as usual growth path, and employment scenario recovers faster, and then the government revenue would also recover. As a result of that, if growth happens, then government revenue also gets enhanced, and then fiscal deficit to GDP ratio would come down automatically in near future. So instead of fiscal conservatism of not, since we don't have enough revenue, if we don't spend or spend in conservative manner today, then the recovery would also be prolonged, and the revenue earning, which is a function of GDP, would also be lower in future. So fiscal deficit to GDP ratio may remain higher, fairly at high level for longer period of time. Therefore, I would argue for a Keynesian demand management policy under a demand constraint situation, which would not cause inflation, obviously, because it is a demand constraint situation. So rather than the ongoing fiscal conservatism which we are witnessing today. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your patience and for paying attention. I think I have crossed my time, but still, if you have some questions, some comments, some criticism, I don't know whether I would be able to reply to all of them satisfactorily, but I would try my level best. But thanks for paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It really was such an enlightening session, and you articulated everything so well with all the statistics and the surveys and the graphs. And we really look forward to having more such talks in times to come. Before we move on to the question and answer session, Deep, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so as my co-coach Rabba said, sir, the statistics was very much quite insightful. I found a lot of comparative analysis and stuff, how pre-COVID and post-COVID things changed, how consumer expenditure, the pattern of expenditure changed. And we have a couple of questions from the students. I would like to take on those. The first question is coming from Manav. He's asking, would the change in consumer preference due to COVID have a good impact on GDP or a bad one? And what kind of expectations we can have in the economic growth in the near future?
Can you read all the questions together so that?
Oh, sure, sir. One more question. Two questions are coming from Isha. We know that COVID-19 pandemic has retarded macroeconomic progress significantly. What measures can the developing economies undertake to mitigate the downturn caused due to the pandemic? And one more is there, with economic activity on the decline, a global recession is predicted by experts. So how can we link the recession with pandemic-induced slowdown?
Yeah. Thanks for the questions. These are the questions in everybody's mind. So very good questions. I think obviously there is no doubt about it that, as I was saying, that this lockdown, COVID-19 induced lockdown affected the growth rate negatively. And it has affected since it was pandemic, it has affected almost all the economies worldwide. However, as I was saying, that developed countries, they have increased the government expenditure when, what has happened. What has happened is, during lockdown, people's income fell, people's consumption expenditure fell. As a result of that, the aggregate demand in the economy, as I was saying, in Indian economy, private final consumption expenditure is 57% of total GDP, right? So that came down drastically. And since PFC comes down, the aggregate demand falls. When aggregate demand falls, then with your existing capacity of production, if you produce at full capacity level, you would not be able to sell your product, be it commodity or service, in the market because of lack of demand, because of lack of private final consumption expenditure, which is induced by the fall in income. So either you have to reduce prices of your commodity that you are producing, or you have to sell less at the existing prices. Now, as a result of that, supply also shrinks. So at aggregate level, your GDP growth rate falls, and so on and so forth. Now, to match this, to compensate for this fall in aggregate demand, the governments, if they enhances expenditure proportionately, then at aggregate level there would not be any net fall in the aggregate demand, right? So that's what developed world governments have done. They were predicting some fall in, let's say, private final consumption expenditure by an amount of 8%. Okay, so if they would not have increased their government expenditure to GDP ratio at all, then probably they would have faced minus 8% growth rate. But they have increased their government expenditure as a proportion of GDP by 8%, more than 8%. Okay, to compensate for that loss. That way, they did not face that negative growth rate like we have faced. Here in this country, what we have done, or not only in this country, in this part of the world, I mean, as I was saying, emerging market economies, etc., most of them enhance government expenditure to GDP ratio by more than 3.5%. But here, there is some increase because of the negative growth rate in GDP. But I mean, if GDP would have remained the same, and if you calculate the total government expenditure of the central government and state governments together on all sectors, including everything, then that has not actually, if you assume zero GDP growth rate, not negative, then the government expenditure to GDP ratio has not increased at all. And therefore, the loss in aggregate demand due to fall in aggregate private final consumption expenditure would not be compensated by increase in government expenditure here. So that is the way forward. That's why I am saying that enhance government expenditure, even if you have revenue shortfall. Here, what has happened is revenue shortfall, huge revenue shortfall has happened as compared to the many other countries, developed countries, etc. Because government has given directly or indirectly, government has given some tax concessions, and also there was fall in people's income or profit. As a result of that, income tax and profits tax which central government collects suffered, indirect taxes which state government collects, and also central part now half of GST comes to central government. So central government and state governments collect. That also got a setback because people's purchasing power came down, so their consumption expenditure came down. So consumption tax like GST as a proportion of total consumption, that also came down, and the government suffered a revenue loss, both state governments and central government. But on the face of revenue loss, you have two options. One is you reduce your expenditure also, because your fiscal deficit is going up, your revenue is lower, and your space for enhancing expenditure is also relatively lower. So you reduce your expenditure. That's what we are witnessing, that all the central governments and state governments, they are not confident enough for going for expansionary demand management policy under a demand constraint situation, even after facing huge unemployment, huge wage cuts, income cuts, and huge misery in the country, and also negative growth rate and so on, because they are saying that they don't have enough fiscal space because of on the face of falling revenue. The other option is what I am proposing. That is, if you follow conservatism, this is not the right time for fiscal conservatism. If you follow fiscal conservatism today, then the result would be that your recovery would take longer time. Okay, your growth rates would remain low, your employment generation, employment opportunities would remain low, people's wage and income would remain low, and as a result of that, purchasing power at aggregate level would remain low. So market would be down for longer time, investors would not be encouraged for longer time. As a result of that, growth would not take place. So revenue flow, future revenue flow of the government would also get affected negatively. Instead of that, which we call front loading of government expenditure, that if you have a plan of spending, let's say 500 rupees in next 5 years, then instead of spending 100 rupees today, 100 rupees tomorrow, etc., next year and so on, if you can spend 300 to 350 rupees in first 2 years, okay, some expenditures have to be carried out in constant stream, for example, salary and pensions of government employees and so on, but non-plan expenditure. But for the plan expenditure, whatever is the plan expenditure of the central government and the state governments, if they plan it to spend in first initial 1 or 2 years, rather than spreading it evenly for in the next 5 years, then I think it would help in boosting the economy immediately in 1 or 2 years time. And if the economy gets a good boost, good growth rate, good demand encouragement sooner rather than the later, then obviously your future revenue flows of the government would also improve. Number one, it would solve the unemployment problem sooner than the later. Number two, and it would enhance people's income and wages. And number two is, even from fiscal point of view, even from the point of view of public finance, the future revenues of government would also be, it is a function of the aggregate level of activity, so would also be higher in near future rather than later. And if revenue with increase in expenditure, if revenue also increases and GDP also grows, then fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, which is expenditure minus revenue divided, obviously revenue receipts, current revenue divided by the GDP, would also be lower in near future rather than higher. So this is Keynesian demand management policy that dig the holes and fill them up. So first you incur larger fiscal deficit, enhance your expenditure, go for expansionary demand management policy, ensure faster recovery and high growth in near future. Then your revenue flow would also be enhanced, and your fiscal deficit to GDP ratio would come down in your future. So that's the digging holes, filling them up policy, which I am prescribing for in the current situation, rather than following fiscal conservatism, which all the governments are seems to be following, that we don't have money, we don't have enough revenue, we have faced revenue shortage. So fiscal deficit is very high, so we have to bring down the fiscal deficit, otherwise international finance capital would be unhappy, and fiscal deficit is necessarily bad for the health of the economy. No, it is not bad. When you are facing extreme severe demand crisis, then fiscal deficit is actually good. The whole world has understood this. The fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, if you can enhance, then it would help in compensating the fall in aggregate demand in other sectors, in private final consumption expenditure, and also it would not create any inflation under demand constraint situation. At least demand pushed inflation. Supply pushed inflation can happen because of higher tax rates or because of higher international oil price and so on and so forth. But demand pull inflation would not be caused under demand constraint situation if you rise fiscal deficit. So that's what my policy prescription is, and that's what the developed world for sure is following, and also most of the countries around the world is following, that they are enhancing expenditure as proportion of their GDP substantially for ensuring faster recovery. As opposed to that, India is not going for expansionary fiscal policy or not increasing the government expenditure to GDP ratio substantially. Instead of that, they are spending in conservative manner under demand crisis, and particularly not only increase in government expenditure. I am also arguing that if it is spent on education, health, and employment guarantee, then lower strata of the economy would, their purchasing power would be enhanced. Anyway, inequality has increased like anything. Under poorer section of population got disproportionately badly hit. So their purchasing power would be enhanced, and following Kaleski, then our value of the fiscal multiplier would also be higher. Whatever investment you are doing or whatever government expenditure you are incurring, that would help more effectively in increasing the aggregate level of income. That's what fiscal multiplier is all about. So the value of the fiscal multiplier would be higher, and it would help us in reviving, not only reviving, but also to go a higher growth path, which earlier was the case, around 7 to 8% in real terms, 7 to 8% per annum growth path sooner than the later.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and articulating everything again so patiently, and like explaining the answers as well so clearly in such a lucid manner. Whether it be about the GDP's components that we spoke about in the beginning, or the households, or the points about the households demand, and specifically the stats, the surveys, and all the charts that you shared, that has helped comparisons and comprehension so much easier for us. And I'm sure that all of us have had such an insightful session. We've all learned so much from you today, and we're really grateful for you for this session. Thanks to each one of you for joining and being an incredible audience. A heartiest thanks to our speaker, Dr. Surjit Das, for making time for us and sharing his valuable insights. My heartfelt gratitude to our principal, Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, who has always been there to cheer us up and act as a support system for all our endeavors. Our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Vinita Tuli, for promoting learning sessions in the college, along with our member teachers from FIC, Dr. Apala Naidu and Uttam Kumar. And a big thanks to the teacher in charge, Department of Economics, Ranjan Swarnakar, Mr. Rakesh Kumar, and moreover, my thanks goes to each one of the core members, Avi, Priyanshu, Pratham, Sukriti, Arga, Divya, Shweta, Shrish, Manasvi, Swati, Akshat, Shashank, and Priyanshi for all your tireless efforts. With that, we conclude today's session. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you.
We look forward to hosting you again on Wednesday, 6th July, at Wednesday, 6th July at 11 a.m. Thank you. Have a productive day ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Surjit. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You can share my email ID to the students. If they are
Yeah,
interested, they can get in touch with me.
Yeah.
And also I have shared the PowerPoint with you, so
Yeah.
you can forward it to them if
Yeah.
some of them are interested.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you later.